we're about there now. So I will start off. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you joining today. We're going to talk about how you can sort of halve your storage costs using Synology NAS solutions. My name is Thomas. I work for Synology. I'm a product specialist, so my job is to sort of help you spec out solutions, build your kit list, and make sure everything's there that you need. I've got Michael with me today on this webinar from Jupiter. So Michael, if you want to tell them a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the managing director at Duplia, and Duplia, we've been Synology partners for a number of years now, and we purely specialize in storage solutions for the production industry. So whether that's a small sort of on-site NAS of 10 terabytes up to multi-petabyte high availability clusters and server centers, we've dealt with it all, and this is an industry we primarily focus on. So it's definitely a niche area for us.
Brilliant. So, yeah, Michael, as you said, it's a sort of particular topic for them in the media production area. So that's why we thought it would be good to bring them on for this webinar. So I'll go over the agenda for today. I'm going to cover off leveraging Synology tools. That makes sense as Synology is on my side of things. And so we'll sort of show how you can utilize your NAS in probably the most effective way, and sort of try and be efficient with it. So your workflows, we'll make sure that that's all managed nicely. Then Michael's going to go over building a solution, and sort of how you sort of the components needed and sort of get good performance and sort of how you can do that. And then he'll also cover off sort of best practices. So making sure that everything's set up as it needs to be and sort of working as it should. So you're going to look a little bit at sort of data growth. So demand to shoot in RAW or 4K or 8K means your data is growing. So you put this maybe on multiple external hard drives at the moment, or you sort of go into that. It can also make collaboration difficult. But as you can see, data is growing substantially sort of each year and probably growing more and more each year also. So with Synology, you can get a 4-bay, an 8-bay sort of desktop unit. But these can also go to rack-based units. So you can buy those 4 bays, 8 bays, or there's this option is a 12-bay rack. These can all be expanded. So kind of where you have the bottleneck of external drive, that's being your limit, and then you've got to use another one and another one. With this, if you need more storage, you just put another expansion on. And so you need even more storage, you put another expansion on. And some of our racks can be expanded sort of 8 times over. So it gives you plenty of room for growth without having to worry about looking to multiple sort of areas for your data. So data growth is covered maybe, but you're wondering sort of how quickly can you access it? Well, 10 gigs an option, so that's your networking. Obviously, speed of your drives will be important. Like we'll probably cover that in more detail a bit later on, but I'll cover sort of 10 gig here. And of course, predominantly Mac based, so Thunderbolt can go to Ethernet in this regard.
Yeah, actually on that, we also see quite a bit of the 25 gig connectivity nowadays through fiber, especially with SSD systems. So that's another area you can increase your bandwidth with.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So yeah, of course, 25 gigs available as well. So that's covering off speeds on networking side, but sort of you're going to want to back up your data and make sure it's safe as well. And Synology offers you multiple options for this as well. So those external hard drives you used before, you can now repurpose them as maybe a backup option. So going via USB. You've got public clouds, so we have our own, but you also got access to Dropbox, Amazon, as you can see there, and Google Drive. And then if you prefer, you can have everything sort of locally or on-site with you, and maybe sort of one off-site, which again, Michael will cover more in detail later. But you can use other Synology devices and back up to those as well. So data's safe. We're happy with that, but sort of accessing it, well, you can access your data from a web browser. So nice and easy through Chrome, Firefox, whatever you decide. Safari, probably more of a common one. So you can access it that way. And then on your mobile, there's mobile apps. So it syncs across all of them. You make a change on one, it syncs across, and it's all sort of handled on the NAS side of things. It's nice and easy. One of the things you may have seen in the e-news is about getting a free extended warranty. So this will be for any Plus series and specifically with Jupiter. So if you raise a project with Jupiter, we'll go into it in a bit more detail later, but just stick around and you'll see how you can get a free extended warranty. So I'm going to move on to our first topic, which is leveraging Synology tools. So we're going to go through sort of your workflow. So we'll start off with sort of shoots being completed and you want to upload it to a NAS. Maybe this is the most common way that you do it at the moment. If you've got an SD card, you put it onto a computer and then you want to move it onto a hard drive. So you've got that double sort of move. I'm going to sort of cover off now how you can upload to the NAS nice and easily by using USB copy. You just put the USB stick right to the back of the NAS and you can upload it that way. I've got a little demo for that. But maybe you sort of worked on your shoot with sort of collaborating artists and you need their files as well. Well, you can do that as well. It's nice and easy. You can request those files and it'll be so they can upload it on their end. You don't have to worry about it. So
Actually, just to add on to that, sorry, we're seeing a lot more on location NASs as well. So, you know, especially with the Flash series, there's a small sort of SSD system that you can have inside a Peli case, and you can do all this ingestion sometimes straight from the camera feed itself on site. So straight away, you're protecting your data across the RAID array rather than having it on SD cards or external hard drives. That's becoming more and more common on sort of larger productions as well.
That's brilliant. So we'll give you a little demo of how to sort of, in this regard, we're going to use USB copy. So it's just we'll
on both systems along with Snapshot.
Sorry about that. Let me just mute the audio on those. So we're going to use USB copy and we're going to add a task and we'll click photo and video. So we're going to name this one Synology shoot and we'll select our source as the sort of date. So this is where our files are located. We're going to specify the destination as Synology shoot. So this is a shared folder I've already created on the NAS. You can see we have a couple options here. So copy data whenever the USB SD storage device is plugged in. You can eject it once our copy completes. And if you need to, you can clear out space on the SD card by deleting the source files after completion. So we're going to run this here and it's going to transfer our photos from that USB into that shared folder on our NAS. And then we'll be able to see here that it's completed nice and quickly. So if we open up File Station on our NAS and go to that folder, you can see that it's dated them when they were taken. So it's quite nice that it brings that information across with you. And you can see that our files are there sort of transferred from the USB. So we're now going to cover off that sort of collaborating artist and getting the files from them. So we're back on our NAS. And you can see here that we've got a collaborator folder. So we're going to click on action and we're going to create a file request because we want our collaborating artist to sort of drop their photos in from the shoot. So we've got a nice sort of generated link there using our Quick Connect ID, which you can set up in Control Panel. We're going to put a password on it because we want to make sure it's safe. But there's also options to sort of set periods where people can access it. And you can also set the number of times that it can be accessed. So we're going to click save on that. And we'll open up an incognito browser, paste it in just so you see that there's nothing sort of, it's completely sort of separate session. So this would be on your collaborating artist side. They can paste this link. You'll see that it uses that Quick Connect ID. It will put an IP address for me because I'm on the same network. But if for them, they just see the Quick Connect ID. They'll put in their password that you sent to them and keep it nice and safe so that no one else can access it. And then we're going to drag in our files. So files that sort of were taken on the phone, for example, as you can see. And then we're going to put in the name so that sort of you can see who's sort of put it in. So if you've got a collaborating artist, you can see that who's uploaded what. You can be collaborating with multiple people. So we'll go back to our NAS just to see, and you'll see that it pops up, giving you a notification that files have been uploaded. It tells you who, and it sort of shows those files in there. So we've got our files on there. You can also edit from the NAS. So Michael will go over sort of making sure that that's a possibility. You can have multiple people editing from the NAS at the same time. So you can all store in one place, and it sort of helps with the collaboration. And makes things nice and easy for you. But then say you've finished and you want to now share your files with your customer. So you finish the shoot, you've got your finals, and you want to be able to share these nice and easily with the customer rather than sort of putting in the USB stick and giving that over. You can do that, but maybe you want to sort of give them access online as well. So we're going to go over how you do that and share that with the customer. So we'll go over sharing files with the customer. So in here, we've got our finals folder, so our completed photos, we're happy with them. And we're going to share those. So same as before, click on the folder, click action, but this time it's share instead of a file request. We make sure we copy that link and we'll enable secure sharing. So I set it to public there so that, you know, it's unlike your customers also going to have a DSM account. We'll put our password. Again, you've got the same options for specifying a specific time and a number of times they can access it. So maybe you need to sort of give them a month where they can then get their files off. And then after that, you don't have to worry about the link anymore. You know it's going to stop. So you don't have to waste your own storage space on customer files. So this is how they would access it. They paste that link in, same incognito browser as we did before. And then you can see that it's using that quick connect link again, so it keep things private. And you can also change your thumbnails and sort of so that you don't need to download specifically the files that you'd want to look at.
Just to jump in on the file request and the file sharing links, these are very useful for sharing with sort of external freelancers or across your production team. You can also go a step further, and you can also actually give them access by a user to your DSM operating system with remote access, which can be more granular with permissions. But obviously, this is a much quicker way to just share a file or upload your rushes for a day, for example. So it's a very common feature.
It's good to know. So I'll cover off sort of the final part of this workflow, which is backing up that data. And I've realized I've frozen again. So this is backing up that data. So obviously you shared your files with a customer. You probably want to now take them maybe off so you can archive them. But in this case, we're just going to make sure that we have another copy of it in case anything goes wrong. It can happen. So we're going to show off using Hyper Backup, which is a nice backup tool, again, completely free of charge, as most of the things are that we show. This just allows you to keep your data safe, and if anything were to go wrong, you can just restore it. So I'll run through a quick demo here of how that works. So we'll go into the application area, and we'll click on Hyper Backup, and we're going to select Synology C2 storage, which is a nice sort of all sort of in one place storage option. So you can just put it in the cloud, and it links up nicely with your Synology box. So I've already logged in here, but it's just me allowing access to that C2 storage. And we'll go through, and so you have multiple options. You can back up your whole volume, all your volumes. If you have multiple, you can pick a specific folder like we have done here, but you also have the option to just specify specifically if you don't want all the files, you just want the finals or just certain parts, you can specify that. If you wanted to back up your sort of applications and system settings, you can also do that here. And then we're just going to put the name in Synology Shoot Backup, just so that we know which backup it is for. You can see then that we're going to enable, we're going to change the time. So we don't want it to back up in the middle of the day every day when we're working. That's maybe not going to help us. So could sort of cause some performance issues. So we're going to set it to back up sort of overnight, so that it's out of the way. And then the integrity check we can set to do on a Sunday where, maybe we're not working, and we'll put it sort of in the evening as well. Maybe not best to do what I've done here, which I've realized earlier when I was looking through this, set them at the same times, maybe not brilliant. I want to set it to sort of run afterwards. That's the case. So I've set it to smart recycle in terms of the backup rotation, as it gives you the sort of broadest options of your files. So it will keep sort of the more common changes that have happened sort of more recently, but then the larger changes over time, so you get more range of backup. So we're going to run this backup now by clicking yes, and that will run. So we'll let that run and come back to it when it's finished. It'll only take sort of 2 minutes or so in this case, but sort of not worth waiting for the webinar. So you can see that was successful. and it shows that the service provider is C2. So we'll open up Synology C2 storage, and you'll be able to see here that the webinar folder there or file there has been backed up. It took 2 minutes, and it happened at 4:20 yesterday. So that's all good. We know it's backed up, and if we need to, then we can restore from that point. So I want to talk about a few applications that you have available to you that will sort of maybe help with collaboration. First one being Synology Drive. It allows you to access sort of files in whatever way you want to, and not just yourself, but your team as well, and sort of allow you to share them through apps on your devices. So whether that be your MacBook, you can use it through there. There's a sort of client for that. There's obviously through the web browser if that's easier. And then you have mobile apps. So while you're on the move, if you need to check something or look at a file or maybe share something with a potential customer, you can show them sort of some of your photos and videos and share that way. But as I said, so you've got your files, but you've also got maybe a team behind you or a few people you work with. You can sort of specify who gets what when it comes to sharing, so that maybe not everyone has permission to it. Maybe some people need it, some people don't. So you've got that option within Drive itself to set that. And see, we covered off sort of some of the password protection and sort of time limits that you can put on things as well. And lastly, with Drive, it's just sort of more of what I've been talking about, the collaboration sort of made nice and easy. So everything syncs in the background. So your colleague will be working on something and you'll pick it up and then you'll see it. So they've updated it and then you can work on that as well. It all syncs together quite nicely, sort of via multiple devices. So that the latest files are always available.
Yeah, another thing with Synology Drive, another use case would be they have a package called Synology Drive Share Sync. So if you have multiple Synology systems, you can actually sync certain shared folders together. And it also has sort of an offline syncing mode for your workstations. So if you have Mac or PC, you can sync certain folders if you're a remote worker, for example, and then you're editing or working with those files as if they're local on your machine, so they can still sync to your main NAS at your office or in the cloud, for example. So that's a very common use case we find as well.
That's really good, and that kind of links perfectly onto the next option. So so ShareSync works brilliantly, NAS to NAS, nice and easy. But we also have Synology Hybrid Share, which is similar, but it sort of links via the cloud. So you can share files via multiple sites and save bandwidth. So you can upload it once to the NAS, which will then upload it to the C2. And it then makes it available to sort of NASs on other sites, so they can download it and work from it there. And they'll only ever really need what they have, so it kind of reduces that storage footprint. You have multiple sites with different sets of files, but access to all of them in the cloud, so that sort of everything is cached locally on each NAS, so that you still get that same sort of local LAN speeds that you'd want, but only the files that you need. So it saves that storage footprint and still gives you the high performance you want. And so a little example of this shows our C2 cloud. You have the main site maybe that's working on something and it's on the NAS that gets sent up to C2, and then branch A can access the same files and branch B can also do the same, and they can all sync together. They all have different sets of files on each, but they'll have access to that main sort of pool in the cloud. So it's nice and collaborative. And then the last thing I want to cover is just Presto file server. So if you've got anything that maybe is like massive size transfer, or anyone that's working remotely, it speeds up the time spent on transferring. So I think there was one that can take, maybe if you're sending large files abroad or something like that, it can take maybe a week or weekend. And using Sitter, it can half that. And then sort of, maybe you're thinking, oh, I can just ship the drives, it'd be quicker. It may be the case, but it comes with extra cost of obviously getting them there. And you have the risk of data loss, especially if it's hard drives, any bump or sort of anything along the moving line can obviously cause some issues. So it sort of gives you a nice sort of safer way of transferring your data across. So that's sort of my side of things. Covered off sort of your workflow and a few applications that are available to you. I'm now going to pass over to Michael from Duplia. Duplia arguably know more about Synology within the media production area than we do ourselves. So it's a nice one for Michael to take care.
Thanks for that, Thomas. So yeah, just to give you a bit of background on Duplia, we've been Synology partners for a number of years now. And as I mentioned earlier, we focus on the media production industry. So we've actually been working in the industry for 10 years, providing storage solutions, and that's all encompassing from storage servers to network access to those servers, and also connectivity and backup as well. And we do truly understand the unique aspects of the data needs in the industry. So for example, your needs for high capacity storage that can grow, as well as still having fast access, you can edit directly from the servers or workstations, is very unique compared to sort of other industries where they might just be backing up or archiving documents or larger files over time. We've got a number of client success stories visible on the Synology website. So there are a couple of our clients that we've worked with over the years to implement Synology solutions to help with their storage and production needs. So just diving into one of these case studies in a little bit more detail. The Media Bunker is a small production studio based in the UK. And they have a small team of editors, and they've actually got a couple of different Synology units. They focus primarily on sports, so sport production, anything from adverts, promotional material, and games as well. If we go to the next slide, we can have a quick look at their overview. So they actually have 3 Synology systems in place at the moment. They have 2 on-site solutions, both configured in a RAID 6 storage array, both with around 130 terabytes of usable capacity. And they have it divided into a production and an archive system. Both of them have 10 gigabit connectivity to 10 gigabit switch and workstations as well. And then that's all fully backed up completely offsite to a secondary location, which again happens through the internet. And we're using Hyper Backup for this particular backup task. And with Hyper Backup, you have a whole load of different options, from keeping version history, retention history, so you can go back to certain points in time for different files, or you can do sort of a mirror copy, for example. So every day it will sync the latest changes. So that's really a flexible tool, and it can be scheduled out of hours when it's not going to impact your office bandwidth. And down there below are some read and write speed tests that we ran when we first implemented the system for them. So you can see with and without jumbo frames, the read and write speeds to a single workstation. So there might still be a little bit more capacity there. These are all still just regular HDD systems, so no SSDs or caching used in this setup. And this works really well for them and has done for a number of years now. So next, I wanted to talk about sizing a solution. Obviously, if you look at the Synology website, there's a number of different models and capacities out there. And there's a few key areas to look at when you're sizing a solution. So with our experience, we can understand based on what sort of resolution you're dealing with or file sizes, how many editors or workstations you want to connect. We can sort of point you in the right direction of which systems would be suitable. And some of the key metrics are the number of workstations, what application suite is being used, whether it's Final Cut, the Adobe suite, or DaVinci, for example. What resolutions you're using. Are you just shooting in HD, or are you using a new Blackmagic 12K camera? That's obviously very different bandwidth and requirements for your data. Also, your growth strategy and what you do with archiving. Some people prefer to keep all of their archive data available online and easy to access. Other people like to look at longer term tape or offline archiving methods. Another critical area is your deployment environment. So for example, if you're a small studio with an open plan office or working from home as a freelancer, versus if you're a production studio with a dedicated server room, the recommendation would be very different based on the noise of the systems. The tower systems are far more quiet, where the rack mount ones are certainly noisier and designed to be in a server room. So these are some of the popular models that we work with. On the tower side, we have the Plus series, so that's the DS1621 Plus, which is a 6-bay that we commonly work with for freelancers or small studios. This has 10 gigabit upgrade as an option, so that can still provide fast access to your files. The next one up would be the XS Plus series, so the DS1621 XS Plus. Again, same 6-bay chassis, little bit more of a powerful CPU in there with the Xeon, and also has 10 gig built in from the factory. Then we have the 12 bay, which is the S3622XS Plus. Again, this has 10 gig built in. It's got a different Xeon processor inside as well, but the main difference here is the expandability. Obviously, going from 6 drives to 12, you can really populate this with hundreds of terabytes with the expansion chassis as well. On the rack mount side, a popular unit for us is the SA3400. It's a really good mixture of an archive server as well as production server. It has really good performance, and it's really scalable in terms of growth. You can have up to 8 chassis with this for expandability to over sort of a petabyte. And on the flash series, we have the FS2500, which is a newer model for Synology. It's a really compact, small one-use system, which is also really good for mobile situations. So if you need access while you're out on site at a shoot, one of these in a Peli case with 10 gigabit switching and everything like that is a great way to really ingest your footage as quick as you can onto a suitable RAID array. Just looking at some of our past installations recently, the average system size seems to be around 70 terabytes of usable capacity now. So that's just giving you an idea of the size of systems that are usually being implemented at the moment.
So when looking at this, you got the flash station there. When would you use SSDs over hard drives?
Usually it'd be a case of what kind of files you're working with. So if you're looking at sort of 4K and above, so the 8K or 12K cameras out there at the moment, that's when we would start to look at a solid state system. And that would be where you really see the benefits. Up to sort of 4K mechanical drives, especially along a larger RAID system, so 16 or 12 drives, that's usually perfectly adequate for sort of a handful of editors, depending on your setup. So also, if you want any mobile solution, we'd always recommend SSDs because they're not as fragile when you're traveling around. It's one less thing to worry about.
Brilliant.
So again, just going about the full solution. So obviously the storage aspect is a critical component of your infrastructure, but there are quite a lot of other factors to consider to make sure you're getting the full performance out of that system. So one of it would be your networking. So if you are in an office-based environment, is your existing networking all Cat6 or Cat6A, so you can do 10 gigabit speeds. Also your whole infrastructure from the server, so your NAS, to your switch, as well as your workstations, ideally would be 10 gigabit compatible. And that might mean you need an upgraded switch or Thunderbolt adapters if you're on Mac for workstations or PCIe cards. And that's when you'll really get the full performance out of your solution. Also, UPSs, so uninterruptible power supplies, they are highly recommended. Obviously, your server is a very expensive piece of equipment, but also has a lot of valuable data on it as well. So this provides an extra level of protection for any surges or power outages. And depending on what model you get, you can integrate them with the UPS. So when the UPS battery runs low, it can automatically safely shut down. So it's definitely advisable. Another area to consider is once you've got a system implemented, how will you support and maintain the system going forward? There's always sort of tweaks as you change your data usage or your workflows. There's always improvements that can be made and optimized. Also DSM updates or security patches. That is something that we do a lot of. So we support and maintain a lot of systems across the UK for production industry. And again, we can help source the entire system. So it's not just the storage side. We can do network cabling. We can do switch recommendations and even workstation connectivity as well. So we can really go in and provide a whole solution around the Synology.
So we can see 10 gig on the screen here. You mentioned 25 gig cards earlier. Are they worthwhile? Is there any sort of use cases where that comes in handy?
The most common 25 gig use we have at the moment is mainly from the NAS or the server to the core switches. So if you can increase that backhaul capacity, and then you can distribute that to more 10 gigabit workstations without sort of running into bandwidth bottlenecks. That's the most common case. You can get 25 gig workstation adapters as well. They are quite pricey at the moment, but that's the most common. But even without 25 gig, with LACP, for example, or aggregation, you can bond multiple 10 gigabit connections from a switch to a a NAS, so you can still get increased throughput to distribute across the number of workstations.
You mentioned bottlenecks there. What are the most common ones that you sort of come across when you've been installing some kit?
Usually it would be networking. Networking would be your first bottleneck in most cases, especially if you're still running sort of 1 gigabit networking. That 10 gig upgrade is probably the most valuable upgrade you can do, and it'll be the most noticeable difference. Aside from that, it really then comes down to the core server. So what kind of CPU and number of drives, how big the RAID is. The more drives in the RAID, the better performance. So that's usually the second bottleneck, and that's when you start to just look at sort of SSD systems for your production server, and maybe reusing your hard drive system as a more of an archive system. But yeah, networking would be the number one bottleneck we see.
It's really good to know. Thank you.
So how does Synology compare? Obviously, Synology have a number of different units in their range. We primarily work with the Plus series upwards, up to the SA and the Flash Station series. There are a number of other manufacturers out there, so such as GB Labs, there's also Edit Share and Avid, for example, in the production industry. And just as a quick comparison on some of the pricing there, you can see that the overall cost of the hardware for the amount of storage you get is vastly different. And also the ongoing pricing as well with support and things like that can all be much more cost effective with Synology if you're just looking for a storage server or production server that you can work with. And the DSM updates are always evolving and new features are coming out, and it's easy to expand as well. So that's just a quick comparison between them. So next we'll look into some of the best practices that we'd recommend. So some of you may already be familiar with RAID, but RAID is just basically your volume of drives that you create on your server. It can sound quite daunting, but in reality it's pretty easy to set up with DSM. But the main thing we would suggest is selecting the right RAID for your requirements, because it's kind of the foundation of your server when you're setting it up initially. So here we have two sort of common RAID arrays. One is a RAID 5, and you have to have a minimum of 3 drives to use RAID 5. And RAID 5 provides you with 1 drive of fault tolerance, which basically means one of those 3 drives can fail, any one of those 3, and all of your data is still currently intact and the system is still usable. Now with RAID 5, because you have 1 drive of fault tolerance, you also lose 1 drive's worth of capacity. So that is why we at Duplia, we always quote on usable capacity, not just the sticker label on the drive and how much storage you'll have, because it's very different once you get it into a RAID array. On RAID 6, in comparison, you need a minimum of 4 drives, but it provides an extra drive worth of fault tolerance. So you can have 2. Again, any of those 2 drives can fail, and you can still have all your data intact and the system's still usable. We typically recommend RAID 6 because it provides greater protection. And especially when a drive does fail, which is something that does happen, it's not uncommon. When you're rebuilding that RAID array, it puts a lot of strain on the remaining drives to migrate all the data to the new drive. And that's typically when a second drive might fail. So RAID 6 gives you that extra protection that another drive could fail during that process and is still protected. Where in RAID 5, you have a lot more risk during that rebuild time as well. RAID 5 is more for smaller systems nowadays, so 6 bays and below you can get away with a RAID 5.
So I don't know about yourself, but we have customers coming to us saying they want speed and they want RAID 10, but when is RAID 10 probably actually needed, if ever?
So RAID 10 is becoming less common for us, mainly because it halves your capacity. So if you need a large amount of capacity, it can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. Also in sort of real world testing, the RAID 6 versus RAID 10, if you're using sizable arrays of 12 to 16 drives, the performance is fairly similar. So you're not really gaining that much performance. I know on paper it's supposed to have a higher multiplication of read and write speeds, but in reality it's fairly similar. Our recommendation, if you really need the speeds, is to look more at an SSD system rather than trying to gain that a little bit extra by switching to RAID 10. but it does also provide far more protection as well. RAID 10, so half of your drives, depending on which stripe set it is, can fail. So you can have a lot more redundancy built in, but it does depend on which drive fail in a RAID 10 or RAID, unlike RAID 5 or 6, where any of those drives can fail and it's okay. RAID 10 is a bit more complex and a bit more picky about which drives can fail.
That's really useful. Thank you.
So another area is redundancy. So aside from the drives themselves, it's also worth looking at what kind of uptime and redundancy you need from a hardware level. So a lot of the rack mount systems come with dual power supplies. This is fairly common in sort of data center environments. This allows you to still use the system if a power supply fails. And aside from hard drives failing, power supplies seem to be the second most common culprit. And that's not just from a Synology's point of view, but just all server brands that we worked with. So having two of those can definitely be a major plus. And looking at this model here, the SA3200D, which Synology offer, this actually goes a step further and has dual controller modules. So it has basically two servers in one, which has sort of an active passive failover. So if anything happens to the motherboard, the RAM, CPU, it will actually fail over to the second module and be sort of as seamless as you can get. And you can go further and look at networking bonding as well. So as I mentioned earlier, to increase the throughput to a switch, you can also use bonding or aggregation to also provide failover. So if a cable becomes unplugged or damaged, you still have connectivity to your server with no interruption. So another area is data backup. This is an area that can easily be overlooked. And it's very important that while you have your server in place and you have a RAID set up and you might have all the redundancy from a hardware level, RAID and redundancy is not the same as a backup. If there was ever a fire, flood, or theft or anything like that, you would potentially lose all your data if it's stored in one location. So a common backup process is known as the 3-2-1 rule, where there are 3 copies of data across 2 different media types, and one of those copies should be offsite in an offsite location. In practice, this can often be achieved with maybe 2 on-site servers and an offsite cloud, or you can look at an on-site server with maybe LTO tape for a different medium with an offsite cloud, or maybe an offsite hosted or co-located server as well. Again, this is an area that we specialize heavily in, and we have our own data center facility in Gloucester, which is a private facility that only we have access to. And this allows us to provide our own cloud systems as well as offsite hosting for hosted servers or workstations for co-location if that was needed as well. Also specializing in this industry, we're very used to dealing with 10 terabytes to hundreds of terabytes for backup. So our pricing and services are very competitive for that space as well. And because we have access to our own facility, we can also ingest and export manually. So if you ever needed to recover your data, we can physically transfer onto a new server chassis for you and have that delivered to you. So you're not having to wait for your upload and download times for your internet to download hundreds of terabytes of data, which isn't usually practical.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Michael. Yeah, so we'll sort of cover things off. So I went over leveraging Synology tools and how you can best utilize your NAS in sort of a more efficient and effective way. Then Michael covered off building a solution, sort of understanding what components can improve performance and whether they are needed. We sort of quizzed him on that a little bit as well, put him under some pressure, which he smashed. And then sort of he covered off best practices and making sure that everything's set up as it needs to be and making sure that you always have a backup of some kind